If they knew then what we know now, the continuing series of conversations to help us all understand how the United States Constitution came to be the foundation of America, the most exceptional nation in the world. If they knew then what we know now, the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the amendments. Chapter 2, with Professor Julie Bornstein and Patti Patane. The Declaration of Rights, October 19th in Congress, in a group, at New York, October 19th, 1765. The Congress, upon mature, whatever happened to that, deliberation, agreed to the following Declaration of Rights and grievances of the colonists in America. There are 13 of them. Nothing terribly remembered in the prose of this as we would in the Constitution. It doesn't seem to be as rememberable as some other documents. What is it? Why is it important?
Well, for one thing, you don't want to teach your citizens that you enter into a revolution because of a single emotional moment. Revolutions evolve in general. They should not be a hot-headed, immediate reaction.
No snap decision, gee, we're upset, let's go to war today.
Well, and that's one reason the word mature, I think, was probably selected, is to let the king know we're not acting out of pique or anger or a superficial disagreement with you. We have deliberated, we have made a mature judgment, and we believe that you are not treating us properly. The other reason this particular document isn't emphasized perhaps in high school or junior high when students start to study it is that we lump them all together and say over a period of years the colonists became increasingly unhappy with the way the British Parliament, and there was a Parliament, and the King treated the colonists of the North American continent. The 13 colonies did start acting together. I mean, after all, the British also had outposts in Canada. The Spanish were in Florida, but the 13 colonies that went from the northern New England states, New Hampshire, and down to Georgia, those states, those 13 colonies, would meet periodically. They would send their representatives to meet.
That would have been the in Congress.
That's right.
Okay.
That's in Congress, or in conference would be a word that we'd probably use now.
About what year did the 13 original colonies kind of were set? When did that happen?
Well, it was evolutionary, so I don't know that you could pick a particular year. Historians might agree on a particular year, but all of this was a developing process.
Between, let's say, the Mayflower Compact of 1620, and then it took another 145 years. Again, it took time to go to arrive at these. We're not very happy, King.
Well, first of all, there weren't 13 colonies in 1620.
But
there was Jamestown in Virginia, and there were the Mayflower folks up in Massachusetts.
But by 1765, when the Declaration of Rights, you then had your Did you then have your
You had
regional-
cities.
Okay.
I mean, we all have studied about the persecution of individual religions in Europe. After all, after 1215, of course, came the Protestant Reformation. So now you have a variety of religions in Western Europe, some of whom were undergoing persecution from their governments. And so many of the colonies were started as a way to get religious freedom from a king who followed a different religion. And so we know about the Quakers in Pennsylvania and William Penn. We know about religious freedom in Rhode Island as being a major reason why Rhode Island was started. And so the colonies were founded at different times by different groups of people from different places in Europe, and it took that time to develop into a more, not urbanized by today's standard, but a more urbanized environment where they started to communicate and engage in commerce amongst themselves.
Were these areas, these colonies, did they for the most part have different Christian religions? In other words, like the Quakers and the Catholics? It was this. Were they pretty much all different, which is why we had different colonies?
No, it wasn't that there were 13 different religions and each assigned to individual colonies. There were some colonies like Rhode Island and Pennsylvania that may have had a religious founding.
Like the Pennsylvania Dutch we hear about.
Well, and the Quakers.
The Quakers.
Benjamin Franklin lived in Philadelphia and he was a Quaker. But there were different religions, and for a long time there was a sense of the tradition from Europe. So, for example, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, they didn't call themselves a state, I don't think they do today, the Commonwealth of Virginia had a state religion supported by taxpayers. It was the Anglican Church, the church founded by Henry VIII when he split from Rome. And everyone paid taxes to the church. Now, the second largest denomination were the Baptists, and they weren't happy about paying taxes to the Anglican Church, of which they were not members.
But this is in one of our colonies.
Yes.
But I thought the people who came over on the boats, the ships, left Europe, England, because they had to, there was no separation of church and state. Yet when they got here, they continued to have church and state as one.
Well, they did in Virginia. Now, keep in mind, and this is true about America today, we are not all of one mind.
Well, no.
There's a huge diversity of opinion. And there is a diversity of how that opinion manifests itself then into governmental laws and rules and regulations. And that's been with us from the very founding of the country. And so that was the tradition in Virginia. That is one of the reasons that Jefferson and Madison felt so strongly about separation of church and state. But it wasn't necessarily the case in all of the other colonies. So Virginia had a huge influence on the writing of our governmental documents.
So it was not what we would think of as the minute they got here, they said, all right, we're going to separate church and state. It didn't happen that way.
That's right. And that's one thing I hope everybody keeps in mind. There is no instantaneous solution to a problem in human behavior. It takes us humans a while to figure things out. We have to live with ideas, and then we should give ourselves leeway to say, oh, that idea doesn't work so well, we ought to change it, without assuming that everybody does everything right from the very beginning.
I noticed that there are two Declaration of Rights.
There are actually more than that. There are two in this book.
There's two in the book, and we'll stick with the two in the book because that's what I've referred to. Don't confuse me, Julie.
Okay.
The 1765, October 19th in New York, and then the second one, 1765. Then the second one appeared 9 years later. Again, a gradual change in Congress at Philadelphia.
That's right. That was a Continental Congress.
The Continental Congress, but it's still called in this instance, it says Journals of the Continental Congress in the little asterisk down here at the bottom.
That's right.
What happened during those 9 years? They said in Article 4 in the 1765 document that the people of these colonies are not, and from their local circumstances, cannot be represented in the House of Commons in Great Britain. In other words, we want to govern ourselves, folks, so leave it, just
Well, actually,
get a grip.
they were looking for a middle ground at
Okay.
the beginning. But we all know, and every child learns this in elementary school, no taxation without representation. There was no question we were being taxed. The colonies were becoming wealthy. People were buying land, they were producing crops, they were producing raw materials that could be made into cloth. There were things being produced in the colonies that Europe very much wanted to buy, so there was quite a bit of commerce. There were lots of things that started to happen as the colonies became more mature. And England saw us as a resource. We were taxpayers. And so I say that even though my people didn't come here till the end of the 19th century, but Americans were taxpayers, but they had no representation in Parliament. One of the middle ground suggestions that came out of these declarations was, let us elect members of the House of Commons. Let us have our aristocracy recognized and be appointed to the House of Lords. Give us representation in Parliament, like you give people who live in England.
You mean the original colonists at some point in time wanted to meet the King of England halfway and say, all right, you want us to pay you taxes and you want us to do your bidding while we're building this country. You want a piece of the action. Well, then we are, I think I've got this, then we are entitled to sit as representatives of America. Was it called America at the time or just the colonies?
Well, it was, the North American continent was definitely called America, but not in the same way that we think of it now.
So we as settlers in the New World of the Americas,
Right.
of North America, want some form of representation for all the stuff you're asking us for.
Well, that's right. I mean, they felt we're educated, we're sophisticated, we're cultured. Why are we not treated with the same dignity and respect as in many cases our relatives, but certainly our compatriots who live in England?
So they really considered, the colonists considered sending their representatives to live in England and sit in Parliament in England and make decisions for us an ocean away.
As our representatives.
Right.
Correct.
So there was a middle ground they were willing to settle for.
No question. And that's why these petitions kept going to the king.
And a Declaration of Rights is one of the, or two of the many petitions that they constantly sent over there saying, hey, king, pay attention to us.
That's right. This was not a situation where in 1776, without provocation, without any hint that this was on the horizon, the Americans suddenly declared their independence. There is an excellent book by the historian Barbara Tuchman called March to Folly that looks at different episodes in history where a leader had the opportunity to avoid disaster and never took it. So if you look at this situation, it's not that this came as a surprise to King George or to the Parliament of England. There were lots of exit signs, you might say, saying, if you don't get off this road now, there's disaster ahead. And there were lots of opportunities every time these petitions came over. And then there were correspondence.
Were there wars?
There weren't any real skirmishes until there was the Boston Massacre. So there was the Boston Massacre. We call it the Massacre of 15 people were killed. But we called it the Boston Massacre that occurred before Lexington and Concord. But that's Lexington and Concord, we historically say.
When did the fighting, the guns?
Not until the 1770s did we start to really see this.
Okay. So I'm noticing some language here in the second Declaration of Rights in Congress at Philadelphia in 1774. And they resolved that that would have been the colonists, us, are entitled to life. Here's where you start to see some words that we recognize.
That come from the Enlightenment philosophers.
Right, entitled to life, liberty,
That's right.
and property, and they have never ceded to any sovereign power whatever a right to dispose of either without their consent. In today's language, that means
The king can't come in and take your property or jail you without some process. And we should never ignore the issue of property, because that's something we don't get in high school, in our civics classes. We don't usually talk about real property issues, but as more mature adults who know that owning our home is important to us, or owning our business is important to us.
or our stuff.
Our stuff. But in those days, real property was the major value. That people didn't have as much stuff as we have now. There was no industry of off-site storage, for example. There were, particularly among the Virginians, there was an effort to start to buy large tracts of land, because everyone could see the colonies were prospering. There was more land to the west, and people were already starting to move away from the coast out to the west. And for example, historians tell us that George Washington and James Madison's father and a number of other Virginia elites were attempting to buy large tracts of land in the Ohio Valley, because they knew settlement was going in that direction, very fertile land, and it would be a good investment. And the king decreed, without any consent of the colonists, that he would not recognize the title, the official legal document that says you own land. He would not recognize the title of any land outside of the current boundaries of the colony of Virginia, thus invalidating their investment.
Well, the men only
That's right.
in Congress at Philadelphia.
Yes, there are no women in this scenario.
Not yet. Number 4, that the foundation of English liberty and of all free government is a right in the people to participate in their legislative council. They're not asking for a lot here. They just want a little participation here. And as the English colonists are not represented, and from their local and other circumstances cannot properly be representative in the British Parliament, they are entitled to a free and exclusive power of legislation in their several provincial legislatures, which means, hey, seeing as how, King, you won't give us any voice, now we've got our provincial legislatures,
Right.
which is our colonies.
That's right.
We've got our colonies, and we are in Congress. We have a group here, and we've kind of decided on a few things. You're wrong. You won't negotiate with us. So what we're seeing here is that these colonists are working up to what comes next. Aha! What we so recognize.
Yes.
And I love this language. I mean, not having been a student of history, which I'm really trying to be now, thanks to Professor Bornstein, and I hope you all are getting the same. I don't know, there's just something about learning. When you know something that you didn't know before.
It's fun.
It's not only fun, but it kind of makes you sit up straight and say, it's like the day you learned to read. I don't remember the day I learned to read English. I remember the day I learned to read Mandarin Chinese.
Oh, that's quite an accomplishment.
Well, it was a paragraph, and I was 40-some years old, and it was just something that I wanted to do, and I did. And the moment of looking down and realizing I read that the first time in my 45 years I read a foreign language other than my birth English. There's just something happens to you, and it's an emotional thing that I know this. And I did learn this previously from Professor Bornstein, and I'm so proud of it, but I only remember half of it. So she's going to enlighten us. It's a thing about learning, and we're going to come up now on the Declaration of Independence in 1776, but let me take just a moment, please. You taught me, and I asked just because I was, I guess, curious, because I had no idea, where did we get the name America, the United States of America, North American continent? I mean, where did the word come from? And you said?
Amerigo Vespucci.
That's what I can't remember. See, I always thought it was his last name, pardon me, was Amerigus or something, but it's Amerigo, A-M.
I think it's A-M-E-R-I-G-O.
Amerigo
Vespucci.
Vespucci, an Italian explorer.
Correct.
Who somehow or another got in his little ship, came over to our East Coast and landed someplace, and a map maker?
Map maker honored him by calling it America.
And it stuck.
It certainly has.
The United States of America. So his name is Amerigus.
I believe it's Amerigo Vespucci.
Amerigo.
I didn't know you were going to talk about it. I should have looked it up and written
That's
it down.
all right. Look it up, please, ladies and gentlemen. Amerigo
Vespucci.
Vespucci. America. That's how we're called today. And how I remember the day after I learned that from you, I remember exactly where I was. I was walking down the steps of a car wash in Palm Desert. I'd left my car and I was walking down, and I thought, I know how we got the name America. I was just talking to myself, and I thought, wow, isn't that neat? I knew something I didn't know before. I had never been taught this, and I found it quite fascinating. And the Declaration of Independence is probably, I love reading the first two paragraphs. It is the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, who doesn't know that?
That's right.
It's quite beautiful. It becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them. If they knew then what we know now, is recorded at the Palm Springs Air Museum. Well, you might ask yourself, what does World War II have to do with understanding the United States Constitution and the history that influenced its writing? If America had lost World War II, America would not be the America we have today. Much of today's Americans would not be Americans. World War II was the first war, and hopefully the last, that affected every American living between 1941 and 1945. That's everyone who fought in the Pacific and Europe, and those that served at home working for the war effort. Every single adult had a book of these, ration stamps. If you were a baby, your milk was bought with one of these. Gas for the car, food, anything you needed, you had to have a ration stamp for. You saved cooking oil and gave it for the war effort. You bought war bonds. Take the time to visit the Palm Springs Air Museum. It is the history that gives you the gift to be an American today.
I am Justin Gardner, and I served. You can feel and almost hear the echoes of time that hold the battles fought by the men and women who defended America during World War II. The Palm Springs Air Museum offers us the opportunity to touch history, hear the roar of the engines that powered America's armed forces into the age of combat flight. As a modern-day soldier walking through the history of this bygone war, I have come to realize that soldiers, such as myself, serve and fight under far different circumstances. Today our families have peace of mind, unimagined by those back home during World War II. We have the gift of communications. Following battles that threaten our lives every day, we are able to call, email, or text home. Unless you have been there as a soldier or the family of a soldier, it is hard to imagine the importance of this contact. We also have, by comparison, relatively short tours of duty. I think of what it must have been like for the soldiers that flew these planes, drove the tanks, and marched the fields of battle, to be away from home continuously for years, often with little or no communication for months at a time. Letters, a handwritten letter, placed in an envelope, had to travel by land, sea, and air. Nothing was instant. Following the news of a major battle where thousands of men were killed in action, families waited in anguish to hear if their loved one was still alive. The only message received following the days or weeks of a battle was when a government car drove up to the home of a soldier and announced that he had died. When no service personnel were available due to the overwhelming number of those killed in action, the news was delivered by telegram. Bodies of dead soldiers came home following weeks, months, or years. Many have yet to come home. As a combat wounded veteran who served and fought in Afghanistan, I am more than lucky and ever so grateful. I have returned home to my wife and 2 little daughters. I'm going to work and wake up every morning knowing that I can support my family and support my fellow Purple Heart veterans. And for those soldiers who died in battle, their families hold their hearts. U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer Suresh Kraus, a Black Hawk helicopter pilot killed in action, Afghanistan. Ming Sun, a U.S. Army Private First Class, killed in action, Iraq. Both Cathedral City High School graduates. Neither Suresh or Ming were born American citizens. They joined our military and fought for freedoms they wanted to call their own. As I continue to serve them in any way I can, as commander of the Palm Springs Military Order of the Purple Heart, chapter number 755, named in honor of my friend who fought and died in Iraq, Private First Class Ming Sun. I am Justin Gardner, and I served.
If They Knew Then What We Know Now is a series of conversations to help us all learn about the historical events that influenced the creation of America and the writing of the United States Constitution. Understanding the times and events that forged the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the amendments is essential to all of us as Americans if we are to remain the most exceptional nation in the world. As you join the conversation between Professor Julie Bornstein and myself, continually ask yourself, if they knew then what we know now, would the writers of the Constitution and those who put their lives on the line when they signed it write it today as they did then? You will come to answer that question, but hopefully with some thought. Think about this. The Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. When written, the long rifle was a single-shot weapon. It took about 30 seconds to load, if you were very good at it. It was unreliable and not very powerful. Today, the same Second Amendment applies to an automatic weapon, which can be loaded with 30 rounds of ammunition and fired in less than 5 seconds. Think about it. If they knew then what we know now.